Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It is an undeniable truth that some of the most intriguing cases handled by my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, have never seen the light of day. Though the world may be captivated by those mysteries which have found their way into my published chronicles, there exist others, darker, more perilous, that, by necessity, remain hidden from public scrutiny. The affair of the stolen letter, the consequences of which could have altered the fate of nations, is one such case. It was during the autumn of 1891, on a particularly cold and mist-laden evening, that I found Holmes ensconced in his customary armchair by the fire, his long fingers steepled together, his eyes fixed upon the swirling tendrils of smoke curling from his pipe. There was about him that air of restless contemplation which I had come to associate with the absence of a worthy problem to engage his formidable intellect. "You have observed, Watson," he remarked at last, breaking the silence, "that the fog lies heavier than usual upon the city tonight. A fitting curtain, one might say, for the machinations of those who prefer the cover of darkness." I was about to respond when the doorbell rang sharply. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson entered with the announcement that a gentleman, an important gentleman, judging by her tone, had arrived, insisting upon an immediate audience with Mr. Holmes. Holmes cast me a brief glance, the flicker of interest in his keen grey eyes betraying his curiosity. "Show him in," he said, setting aside his pipe. "It appears, Watson, that our solitude is at an end." Little did I suspect that the visitor who entered our sitting room would bring with him a matter of such gravity that it would test even Holmes's unparalleled powers of deduction. The man who stepped into our quarters was tall and imposing, though his bearing was weighed down by an air of unmistakable distress. He was clad in an immaculate frock coat, his gloved hands trembling slightly as he removed his hat to reveal a head of grizzled hair. His sharp, aquiline features, though dignified, bore the unmistakable signs of anxiety. Sherlock Holmes, ever the keen observer, rose to greet him with a slight nod, his gaze already scrutinizing every detail of the stranger's appearance. "Pray, be seated," he said, gesturing toward the vacant chair by the fire. "I see that you have come in great haste, and not without some trepidation. Your concern, I take it, is not of a private nature, but one that extends to affairs of state." The man started visibly. "You? How could you possibly know that?" Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. "The cut of your coat suggests an association with government offices, yet your boots, though polished, bear traces of dust from St. James's Park. An odd route for a man of your station, unless he wished to avoid the more conspicuous streets. Your hand trembles, not with age, but with apprehension, and your eyes dart toward the window, as though fearful of being observed. These, sir, are not the mannerisms of a man burdened by personal woe, but of one carrying the weight of a much larger peril." The visitor exhaled slowly, his expression one of both astonishment and resignation. "You are correct, Mr. Holmes. The matter I bring to you is one of the utmost delicacy and of unspeakable danger." Holmes leaned forward, his fingers interlacing as he studied the man before him. "Before we proceed further, sir, may I have the honour of knowing to whom I am speaking?" The visitor hesitated, then inclined his head. I am Sir Reginald Ashborne, advisor to Her Majesty's government. What I am about to divulge must not leave this room. You must give me your word that no record of it shall be made. Holmes's lips twitched. Dr. Watson here is a man of discretion, and I assure you, Sir Reginald, that my services have often been engaged in matters requiring the utmost secrecy. Speak freely. Sir Reginald leaned forward, lowering his voice. A letter has been stolen, Mr. Holmes, a letter of such consequence that, should its contents be made public, it could shake the very foundations of the monarchy and plunge Britain into a crisis of unprecedented proportions. Watson and I exchanged glances. You have my attention, Holmes murmured. Pray, continue. The letter was taken from my private study at Ashborne House. The safe in which it was kept was opened without force, the lock expertly picked. What is most perplexing is that nothing else was taken. No jewels, no valuables, only the letter. It is clear that the thief knew precisely what they sought. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. Intriguing. And what, if I may ask, were the contents of this letter? Sir Reginald hesitated, his jaw tightening. That, Mr. Holmes, I cannot reveal. Not even to you. Holmes exhaled, his expression unreadable. Then, Sir Reginald, you asked me to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. However, let us proceed under the assumption that this was no mere act of theft. You fear that the letter has fallen into the hands of someone who intends to use it for leverage, perhaps blackmail. Or worse, Sir Reginald said grimly. There are forces, both within and beyond our borders, who would benefit from its exposure. I need you to find that letter before it is too late. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Very well. But tell me, Sir Reginald, who, besides yourself, knew of the letter's existence? Sir Reginald's hesitation spoke volumes. Only a handful of individuals, and one of them, I fear, may not be as loyal to the crown as I once believed. Holmes smiled thinly. Then we have our starting point. Watson, the game is afoot. Holmes sat motionless, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin, his gaze fixed intently upon Sir Reginald. There was a long silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock upon the mantelpiece. When at last Holmes spoke, his voice was measured, deliberate. You say, Sir Reginald, that nothing else was taken from the safe. Nothing at all, the statesman confirmed. The letter, and the letter alone, was removed. Holmes inclined his head slightly. That, at least, simplifies our inquiry. A thief who overlooks the obvious temptations of wealth is either possessed of unusual restraint or guided by a singular objective. This was no common burglary, Sir Reginald. It was a targeted act, executed with precision. Indeed, Sir Reginald replied gravely. The lock showed no signs of forced entry, nor were there any disturbances in the study, no shattered glass, no broken door latch. It is as though the thief simply walked in, took what he sought, and vanished into the night. Holmes turned sharply to me. You observe, Watson, how neatly this points to an inside job. An intruder, unfamiliar with the household, would be forced to navigate in darkness, risking detection. Yet here we have a case where the thief knew exactly where to look and how to reach it unimpeded. Such knowledge implies either an accomplice within the house, or a visitor who, under some pretense, had prior access. Sir Reginald stiffened. I cannot conceive of anyone in my household betraying me, Mr. Holmes. Then we must consider the alternative, Holmes mused. Someone beyond suspicion, a guest, a friend, who studied the room before striking. For a moment, Sir Reginald said nothing. Then, almost reluctantly, he murmured, There were visitors that evening. Lady Evelyn had guests, diplomats, officials. But surely you do not suspect. I suspect everyone, Sir Reginald, Holmes interrupted coolly, until I am presented with reason to do otherwise. Sir Reginald sighed deeply, leaning forward as though the weight of the situation pressed heavily upon his shoulders. You do not yet comprehend the gravity of what has occurred, Mr. Holmes, he said at last. If that letter falls into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. Holmes regarded him steadily. You fear exposure, blackmail, worse. Sir Reginald's voice was barely above a whisper. The British government will not, cannot acknowledge the letter's existence. Should it be made public, it could unravel alliances, destroy reputations, and invite foreign intervention. There was a brief pause before Holmes spoke again. Then I take it that even the highest authorities cannot assist in retrieving it. Sir Reginald shook his head. The Prime Minister himself has ordered that the matter be handled with absolute discretion. Officially, the letter does not exist. Holmes steepled his fingers once more. Which means that, should the worst occur, you alone will bear the weight of its consequences. Sir Reginald's silence was answer enough. Holmes rose abruptly. Very well, I shall take the case. But understand this, Sir Reginald. Someone within your immediate circle holds the key to this affair. Whether they are traitor or dupe remains to be seen. And you believe you can find the letter? Holmes smiled thinly. I shall find it, Sir Reginald. The question is whether I shall do so before it is too late. He turned to me with a familiar gleam in his eye. Come, Watson. There is work to be done. The following morning, Holmes and I set out for Ashborne House, Sir Reginald's ancestral residence. The stately manor, with its towering facade and imposing iron gates, bore all the marks of aristocratic grandeur, yet beneath its magnificence lay an unmistakable air of unease. As we ascended the steps, Sir Reginald himself received us, his countenance drawn with fatigue. I cannot tell you how relieved I am that you have come, Mr. Holmes, he said. Since last evening, I have felt as though some unseen hand were tightening its grip upon my affairs. Holmes inclined his head, but made no reply. His sharp eyes were already sweeping over the grand entrance hall, absorbing every detail with quiet precision. Would you care to begin in the study? Sir Reginald suggested. I have ensured that nothing has been disturbed since the theft. Quite so, Holmes murmured. But before we proceed, I should like to form an understanding of the household. How many individuals reside under this roof? Sir Reginald hesitated. Myself, my niece, Lady Evelyn, and a staff of 7, including the butler, 2 footmen, and a housekeeper. Holmes nodded. And of the guests from that evening? A small gathering, 4, aside from Lady Evelyn. 2 fellow diplomats, a financier and a French envoy, Colonel Leclerc. Holmes's expression did not change, yet I knew he had stored the information away for later scrutiny. Very well, Sir Reginald. Let us proceed to the study. I should like to see the scene of the crime with my own eyes. The study was a grand yet functional room, its mahogany desk positioned before an expansive window that overlooked the east garden. A heavy iron safe stood against the far wall, its door now ajar, revealing its empty interior. Holmes approached it at once, running his long fingers over the edges of the lock, his eyes narrowing as he examined the mechanism. A most delicate touch, he murmured. No brute force, no crude instruments, only a hand well acquainted with the craft of locksmithing. He turned to Sir Reginald. You have questioned your staff, I presume? At once, Sir Reginald replied. None of them saw or heard anything amiss. Holmes settled himself into a chair, steepling his fingers. Then let us hear it from them directly. At Sir Reginald's summons, the household staff were brought before us one by one. The butler, a solemn man of middle age, confirmed that the house had been locked at the usual hour and that no doors had been found ajar in the morning. The footman swore that no stranger had entered the study, and the housekeeper insisted that nothing had been out of place when she tidied the room earlier that day. Holmes listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When the last of them had been dismissed, he turned to Sir Reginald. "Tell me, does Lady Evelyn have access to the study?" "Yes," Sir Reginald admitted. "She has always been free to use the library adjacent to it. But surely you do not think—" "I think nothing as yet," Holmes interrupted, rising to his feet. "Only that someone entered this room that night with knowledge of precisely what they sought. Now let us see what the room itself can tell us." Holmes moved through the study with the grace of a predator, his eyes flicking from one detail to another, his mind assembling patterns invisible to the untrained eye. I had long since learned that in such moments it was best to remain silent and observe. He paused before the safe, his fingers running lightly over its surface. "No dust along the keyhole," he murmured. "It has been opened recently, perhaps multiple times. The thief was no amateur, but neither was he unacquainted with this device." He stepped away, inhaling sharply as his keen gaze settled upon the corner of the desk. "Ah," he said softly. "Do you detect it, Watson?" I moved forward, but at first I saw nothing of note. Then as I leaned closer, a faint yet unmistakable trace of perfume reached my senses. Subtle, delicate, and wholly unexpected in a statesman's study. "A woman," I muttered. "Indeed," Holmes said, "and one who did not expect to leave evidence of her presence." He turned suddenly and crossed to the bookshelves that lined the far wall. His fingers skimmed the spines with practiced ease until they halted on a single volume, one that had been dislodged ever so slightly from its place. With a swift motion, he withdrew it, revealing a faint rectangular outline in the dust behind it. "Something else was taken," he said. Sir Reginald stepped forward. "Impossible!" The letter was the only item missing from the safe. "The letter, yes," Holmes agreed. "But there was something else. A document, perhaps, or an object concealed among these shelves. And whatever it was removed in the same instance as the letter." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Then our situation is worse than I feared." Holmes replaced the book and turned to him. "Sir Reginald, you spoke of 4 guests that evening, including Colonel Leclerc. Tell me, was Lady Evelyn in their company?" Sir Reginald hesitated. "Yes, she dined with them before retiring early for the night." Holmes's expression did not change, but I knew he had reached a conclusion. "Then it would seem, Watson," he said quietly, "that our investigation is only just beginning." Holmes remained silent for several moments, his fingers lightly drumming against the arm of his chair as he reviewed the facts before him. At last, he turned to Sir Reginald. "You mentioned 3 individuals who attended the gathering that evening: Lady Evelyn Ashborne, Mr. Harold Redfern, and Colonel Leclerc. Each of them, I presume, had opportunity enough to approach the study undetected." Sir Reginald frowned. "They were all present at dinner, but after that, I cannot say. Lady Evelyn retired early, I believe, while the gentlemen remained in the drawing-room for brandy and cigars." Holmes nodded. "Let us consider them individually. Lady Evelyn, your niece, what do we know of her?" "She has spent much of her life abroad, mingling in diplomatic circles," Sir Reginald admitted. "She is well connected, intelligent, and, if I may say so, spirited. But she is loyal, Mr. Holmes. She would never betray her own blood. Holmes made no reply to this, but merely steepled his fingers. And Mr. Redfern? Sir Reginald's expression darkened. A government official with unfortunate sympathies for certain Republican movements abroad. He has made no secret of his discontent with the monarchy. I have long suspected that he harbours radical views, though he is careful to keep them in check. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Intriguing. And lastly, Colonel Leclerc. A French envoy, Sir Reginald said slowly. A charming man, well received in London, but undoubtedly a servant of his own country's interests. He left for Dover the very morning after the theft. Did he indeed? Holmes murmured. Then, Watson, I believe we have a most interesting tangle to unravel. Lady Evelyn Ashborne was a striking woman, poised and composed, yet there was a sharpness in her gaze that suggested a mind accustomed to manoeuvring through delicate affairs. When we were introduced, she regarded Holmes with a mixture of amusement and wariness. My uncle tells me you have come to uncover a scandal, Mr. Holmes, she said lightly, folding her hands before her. I do hope you shan't be too disappointed. Holmes inclined his head. Not a scandal, Lady Evelyn, merely the truth. Tell me, what was your acquaintance with Colonel Leclerc? Her expression did not change, but there was the slightest pause before she answered. He was a guest at dinner. We spoke, as diplomats often do, of trivial things. Society, politics, the absurdity of war. Nothing that would interest you, I'm afraid. And Mr. Redfern? Holmes pressed. You know him well? Her brow furrowed. He is a friend of my uncle's, though I confess I do not share his views. He is ambitious, perhaps dangerously so, but as for thievery, I cannot see him stooping to such a crime. Holmes studied her in silence for a moment before speaking again. One final question, Lady Evelyn. Do you wear a particular perfume? For the first time she seemed taken aback. A perfume? Why, yes, a gift from a friend in Paris. Holmes gave a faint smile. Fascinating. You have been most helpful. As we took our leave, I noted the contemplative look in Holmes's eyes. What do you make of her? I asked. A woman of secrets, Watson, he murmured, but whether they are relevant to our case remains to be seen. As we walked back toward the study, Holmes turned to Sir Reginald. You mentioned that Colonel Leclerc departed for Dover the morning after the theft. Was this departure sudden? Sir Reginald frowned. Indeed, it was. He had planned to remain in London for another week, but after the dinner, he claimed urgent business in Paris required his attention. He left at dawn. Holmes nodded slowly. Did he seem troubled? Anxious? Sir Reginald considered the question. He was composed, as ever, but there was something preoccupied in his manner. He was eager to leave. Holmes's eyes brightened. Most revealing. You suspect him, then? I asked. Holmes tapped his fingers together. I suspect, Watson, that his departure was no mere coincidence. If he was involved, he would not have risked staying in London once the theft was discovered. Sir Reginald's expression was grim. Do you believe he has the letter? Holmes smiled faintly. That, my dear sir, is what we must determine. But before we speculate further, let us see what your fireplace has to tell us. Holmes knelt before the hearth in the study, his sharp gaze sweeping over the blackened remnants within. With great care, he reached in and extracted a fragment of parchment, its edges charred, but its centre still intact. Ah, he murmured, holding it up to the light. Fortune favours us, Watson. I leaned closer, noting faint traces of ink upon the paper. Though much of the text had been lost to the flames, Several words remained legible. Confidential. Rencontrez-moi. Minuit. French, I murmured. Indeed, Holmes said, and rather suggestive. Confidential. Meet me. Midnight. It would appear our thief was not acting alone. Sir Reginald's face had gone pale. You mean to say there was a conspiracy? Holmes brushed the soot from his fingers. I mean to say, Sir Reginald, that our culprit did not act impulsively. This theft was planned, and the stolen letter was meant to be delivered to another party under the cover of night. Then if we find this recipient, we find the letter, I said. Holmes's lips curled into a smile. Precisely, Watson. And I have an idea as to where we should begin. The trail of the stolen letter led us to an unlikely quarter, the dimly lit recesses of a Southwark drinking establishment known as the Black Swan. It was the sort of place where men spoke in hushed tones, where business was transacted with a nod rather than a contract, and where a man's silence was often worth more than his words. Holmes, however, had little patience for discretion when the matter at hand demanded urgency. Jacques Fournier, he murmured as we stepped inside. A man of talent in certain illicit circles. A forger, Watson, of singular skill. If the stolen letter has been altered in any way, I dare say his hands have touched it. Our entrance was met with little interest from the tavern's patrons, though I did not miss the way one or two men darted cautious glances toward us before returning to their tankards. Holmes moved through the room with the ease of a man who belonged anywhere and everywhere, his sharp gaze sweeping over the figures hunched in shadowed corners. Then, without hesitation, he strode toward a wiry fellow seated alone at a far table, a half-drained glass before him. Bonsoir, Fournier, Holmes said smoothly, lowering himself into the opposite chair. I trust the work has been steady. The man stiffened. He was thin, with an angular face that spoke of years spent in wary observation. His fingers, long and delicate, twitched involuntarily before he forced a smirk onto his lips. You have me at a disadvantage, monsieur, he said in a lilting French accent. I do not believe we have been introduced. Holmes leaned forward. Introductions are unnecessary. You are Jacques Fournier, once a master engraver in Paris, now a forger of considerable reputation here in London. And I suspect that, within the past week, you were commissioned to replicate a most particular seal, a royal one, at that. Fournier's expression did not change, but I saw the brief flicker in his eyes. He set down his glass with deliberate care. If that were true, mon ami, it would be most dangerous to admit, would it not? Holmes smiled. Indeed. But you see, Fournier, I am not here to arrest you. I am here to make you talk. Fournier's fingers drummed once upon the tabletop before he leaned back with a sigh. I have no desire to make trouble for myself, he muttered. But I also have no wish to make trouble with those who employ me. Holmes produced a sovereign from his pocket and placed it upon the worn surface of the table. Then let us call it an exchange, shall we? Information for security. Fournier regarded the coin with little interest. You misunderstand, monsieur. The men I deal with would not take kindly to my speaking. I am of greater value to them silent than I am with a few shillings in my pocket. Holmes's smile did not waver. Come now, Fournier. We both know that silence, like any other commodity, has a price. The only question is whether the price of keeping quiet outweighs the price of speaking. Consider carefully before you answer. There was a long pause. At last, Fournier exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging. You are persistent, monsieur. Very well. He lowered his voice. A woman came to me. I never saw her face clearly. She wore a veil, but she provided a detailed sketch of what she wanted, a royal seal, precise in every aspect. I did the work, received my payment, and asked no further questions. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And the seal? Was it intended to be used on an official document? Fournier hesitated before nodding. It would seem so. The workmanship was meant to deceive even the most discerning eye. It was no mere forgery. It was a replacement designed to be indistinguishable from the original. A substitution, Holmes murmured. Then the stolen letter was not merely taken. It was replaced with a forgery, one convincing enough to pass for the original. Fournier raised an eyebrow. If that is so, monsieur, then whoever did this was not merely a thief. They were a player in a much larger game. Holmes stood abruptly, his energy renewed. Indeed. And now, Fournier, you must recall, did the woman who hired you leave any identifying marks? A name, an accent, even a particular turn of phrase? Fournier frowned. Nothing certain, but she spoke English fluently, better than most natives. And when she left, she murmured something in French under her breath. Holmes tilted his head. And that was? Fournier hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, Le vent tourne. The wind is changing, Holmes translated. He exchanged a glance with me before turning back to Fournier. Indeed, my friend, I rather believe it is. Holmes sat in silence for several moments after we had left the Black Swan, his long fingers interlaced, his gaze fixed upon some invisible point in the distance. I had seen this expression before, one of intense concentration, where the wheels of his mind moved at an extraordinary speed, assembling the scattered fragments of a puzzle into a coherent whole. At last, he spoke. Watson, consider the implications of what we have just learned. The letter was stolen, but not merely for its contents, I replied. It was removed and replaced, a deception so perfect that no one would suspect a forgery had taken its place. Precisely, Holmes said. And that tells us two things. First, the thief was no common criminal. Such a scheme requires patience, planning, and, above all, access to the original document. Second, and more importantly, it means that whoever took the letter did not merely wish to possess it. They wished to control it. But why go to such lengths? I asked. If blackmail were the objective, would it not be simpler to steal the letter outright and demand a price for its return? Holmes shook his head. No, my dear Watson. A stolen letter may cause alarm, but a letter that remains undetected, altered, rewritten, and passed off as genuine, may shape the fate of nations. The gravity of his words settled upon me. Then we are not merely dealing with a theft, I murmured. We are dealing with a conspiracy. Precisely, Holmes said, and the nature of the forgery suggests that this is no mere financial extortion. This, Watson, is a matter of power. The question remains, who benefits from the deception? His fingers drummed against his knee. We must return to Sir Reginald immediately. I must see the replacement letter with my own eyes. Holmes examined the document with a scrutiny so intense that it seemed as though he might pierce its very fabric with his gaze. We had returned to Ashborne House at once, where Sir Reginald, at Holmes's insistence, had reluctantly provided the letter he still believed to be genuine. It is a most admirable piece of forgery, Holmes murmured at last, turning it over in his hands. The seal, as Fournier described, is an exact replica. The handwriting, carefully studied and executed. But see here, Watson. The ink. I peered closer. It is still fresh, I noted. Not fresh, Holmes corrected, but newer than it ought to be. He set the letter down with a quiet satisfaction. The original was older, its ink faded. This, by contrast, was created within the last few days. Sir Reginald, pale and visibly shaken, exhaled unsteadily. Then it is as you feared. The letter has been tampered with. It has been rewritten, Holmes corrected. The question is, what alterations have been made? Sir Reginald hesitated. The original document contained delicate information. It concerned a royal indiscretion, one that if revealed would be devastating. It was meant to remain locked away, never to be used. And yet, someone has ensured that it will be used, Holmes murmured. But not in its original form. They have altered it, no doubt exaggerating the scandal, twisting its words so that it may be used as a weapon rather than a warning. Sir Reginald's face darkened. Blackmail, then? Holmes shook his head. Worse. Blackmail relies upon secrecy. This, Sir Reginald, is not intended to remain hidden. It is meant to be exposed. A chill ran through me as I realized the truth. The letter was no longer a liability locked within a safe. It was a tool of destruction, waiting for the perfect moment to be unleashed. Holmes straightened. We must act swiftly, Watson. If the altered letter reaches the wrong hands, we may find ourselves witnesses not merely to scandal, but to the fall of a kingdom. It was late when we returned to Baker Street, our minds still occupied with the disturbing implications of the altered letter. Holmes had spoken little on the journey back, save for a few cryptic remarks concerning the precision of the forgery and the certainty that its true purpose had not yet been revealed. As I entered our sitting room, I noticed at once that something had been placed upon the table in our absence. A folded piece of parchment, its edges slightly crumpled, as though handled in haste. Holmes, ever alert to the smallest irregularity, picked it up without hesitation and unfolded it. His sharp gaze flickered over the hastily scrawled words before he passed it to me. The message was brief but unmistakable in its intent. Leave this matter alone. You do not understand what you are meddling with. Walk away before it is too late. There was no signature, no identifying mark, only the stark warning written in an unsteady hand. Delivered by hand, Holmes murmured, his fingers tracing the creases in the parchment. No postmark, no envelope. Our visitor was careful. Watson, do you perceive the significance of this? I frowned. That we are being watched? Precisely, he said. And more than that, it suggests urgency. Whoever sent this fears we are close to uncovering something of great consequence. He tossed the note into the fireplace, where it curled and blackened in the flames. Come, Watson, a threat loses its power when one does not heed it, and I have no intention of heeding this one. It was nearly midnight when we stepped out onto Baker Street once more, Holmes declaring that a walk would aid in clearing his thoughts. I had grown accustomed to his peculiar habits, and though I longed for rest, I followed without protest. We had scarcely reached the corner when I became aware of a faint but distinct sound. The rapid clatter of hooves upon cobblestone, growing louder with each passing second. Holmes halted abruptly, his head turning sharply toward the oncoming carriage. Watson, he began. But in that instant, the warning was unnecessary. A dark shape hurtled toward us at a reckless speed, the driver hunched low, his whip lashing furiously at the horses. The vehicle bore no lamps, no insignia, only the sheer force of its momentum betraying its deadly intent. Holmes seized my arm and pulled me sharply to the side. I stumbled backward onto the pavement as the carriage shot past us, missing Holmes by a hair's breadth. A moment later, it had vanished into the night, its driver never once glancing back. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Holmes straightened, brushing dust from his sleeve with an air of detached amusement. "Crude," he muttered, "but effective in its simplicity. Someone, it seems, is growing impatient." "You might have been killed," I exclaimed. He turned to me with a faint smile. "And yet, here I stand." "Come, Watson, this only confirms what I already suspected. We are closer to the truth than they would like us to be." The following morning, I took it upon myself to visit Lady Evelyn. Holmes had departed early without explanation, leaving me with strict instructions to observe her closely and note any deviation in her manner. She received me with grace, but seemed surprised by my visit. "Dr. Watson," she said, gesturing for me to sit, "has something happened?" "I should like to ask you again about Colonel Leclerc," I said, watching her carefully. "You claim to have no dealings with him beyond the dinner at Ashborne House. Was that entirely true?" She hesitated, and in that moment I knew Holmes had been right to suspect her secrecy. At last she exhaled. "Very well," she admitted. "I did correspond with Colonel Leclerc, though not in the manner you might suppose. He was a friend, nothing more." "Then why conceal it?" I pressed. "Because my uncle would never have approved," she said bitterly. "Leclerc wished to warn me of dangers within our own government, whispers of discontent, of manipulation. He said there were those who sought to use Britain as a pawn in their own game, but I did not believe him." "And now?" I asked. Her gaze dropped. "Now, I fear I was mistaken." Holmes listened in silence as I relayed my conversation with Lady Evelyn later that evening. When I had finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "It fits," he murmured. "Every piece aligns with the greater design." "Then you believe this is not a simple case of espionage?" I asked. "Not espionage, Watson. Manipulation. The letter was never meant to be used in blackmail. It was rewritten, not to be hidden, but to be revealed. Its purpose is to incite distrust, to fracture alliances. A weapon disguised as a scandal. And who stands to gain from such a deception?" Holmes's gaze was sharp as steel. "The very ones who wish to see Britain weakened. Colonel Leclerc may have been an unwitting player, but there is another hand behind all of this, one that has orchestrated every move with precision." He turned abruptly, reaching for his coat. "Come, Watson. If we are to stop this before it is too late, we must move quickly. Tonight, we lay a trap." And with that, we stepped once more into the London night, the weight of impending revelation pressing upon us. Holmes was at his most animated that evening, pacing the room with swift, deliberate steps, his mind moving at a speed no ordinary man could match. The pieces of the puzzle had at last arranged themselves to his satisfaction, and now only one task remained: to lure the true culprit into revealing himself. "It is always a question, Watson," he mused, "of forcing the opponent's hand. They have operated thus far under the illusion that they control the game. That must change." "And how do you propose to do that?" I asked. Holmes stopped, his eyes gleaming. "By letting them believe the letter has been recovered." He sat at once at his writing desk, penning a short but potent note. When he had finished, he sealed it with a deliberate press of wax and rang the bell for Billy, our young page. "Take this at once to the offices of the Times," he instructed. "It must appear in the first edition tomorrow morning." As Billy departed, I took up the discarded draft of the message, reading it aloud. "The document recently removed from the Ashborne estate has been recovered and is presently secured within an undisclosed government archive. Further investigations are underway." I looked up in astonishment. "Holmes, This will send our adversary into a frenzy. Precisely, he said. Whoever has sought to manipulate this letter cannot afford to let it remain in our possession. They must act, and when they do, we shall be waiting. But where do you expect them to strike? Holmes smiled. Where else, Watson? The Foreign Office archives. They will assume that is where the letter has been stored, and when they come for it, they will find us instead. The night was cold and still when we arrived at the Foreign Office archives, our steps muffled by the thick fog that clung to the streets. Holmes had arranged for discreet access to the building, and we took up our position within the dimly lit records chamber, concealed behind a row of imposing wooden cabinets. The hour approaches, Watson, Holmes murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. A desperate man is never more dangerous than when he believes all is lost. We waited in silence, the ticking of a distant clock marking the slow passage of time. Then, at precisely midnight, the stillness was broken. A faint scrape at the window, so soft that I might have dismissed it as the wind had I not been expecting it, was followed by the careful slide of a latch. A shadow moved against the dim light outside, and then, with practiced stealth, the figure of a man slipped into the room. He moved swiftly and with purpose, making directly for the locked file drawers where the letter, according to our deception, was now kept. Holmes gave me a brief nod. We stepped forward as one, the beam of my lantern falling upon the intruder's face. He froze, caught in the act, his hand halfway to the drawer. "Mr. Redfern," Holmes said smoothly. What an unexpected pleasure. Harold Redfern's face was a mask of shock and fury. For a brief moment, he looked as though he might make a desperate bid for escape, but Holmes was quicker. In an instant, he had seized Redfern's wrist and relieved him of the slim dagger he had drawn from his coat. "Really, my dear fellow," Holmes chided. "Breaking into government archives. How very improper." "I believe we have much to discuss." Redfern's expression darkened. "You don't understand, Holmes," he said hoarsely. "You have no idea what you are interfering with." Holmes's smile did not waver. "On the contrary, Mr. Redfern," he replied. "I understand exactly what I am interfering with. And now, so shall you." Harold Redfern's defiance faltered under Holmes's unrelenting gaze. His breath came fast, his eyes darting between us like a trapped animal searching for escape. But there was none. "You had best begin speaking, Redfern," Holmes said calmly. "You have already been caught in the act. The only question that remains is whether you will go down as the mastermind or the fool." Redfern swallowed hard. "I was trying to correct an injustice," he said at last, his voice low and urgent. "You don't understand, Holmes. That letter, it should never have been hidden. It exposes corruption, deceit at the highest level. It was meant to come to light." Holmes shook his head. "A noble sentiment, no doubt, but a convenient lie nonetheless. You are no whistleblower, Redfern. You did not steal the letter yourself, nor did you forge its replacement. You are a pawn, useful but expendable. The real question is, who is moving the pieces?" Redfern hesitated, his fists clenching. "I don't know his name," he admitted. "I only know the orders I was given. I was approached weeks ago, told that there existed a document, one that, if made public, would change the course of British politics. My task was simple: ensure that the letter found its way into the right hands." "And those hands belonged to Colonel Leclerc," Holmes stated. Redfern's face darkened. "I met him only once, a private meeting. He assured me that France had no desire to act against Britain, but that others did. He said the truth must be revealed before it was too late. Holmes gave a quiet sigh. And like a faithful servant, you did as you were told. Tell me, Redfern, was there a price attached to your patriotism? Redfern flinched but said nothing. I see, Holmes murmured. So it is money and ideals. A dangerous combination, Watson. It is no wonder he was so easily manipulated. Redfern's voice was a whisper. I was promised it would be bloodless. Holmes straightened. Bloodless? My dear Redfern, you have been used by men who understand blood far better than you do. And now, I shall show you the hand that played you. Holmes stood, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. Watson, it is time we conclude this matter. There is only one place where our presence is required tonight. I followed him from the Foreign Office without question, Redfern in our reluctant custody. The cab ride was spent in silence, save for Holmes's occasional murmurings, his mind already far ahead of us. It was only when we arrived at Ashborne House that he turned to me. Sir Reginald must hear this firsthand, he said, as must his niece. Sir Reginald received us with evident impatience. Holmes, what is the meaning of this? You arrive at such an hour with a prisoner in tow. Holmes motioned for Redfern to be seated before turning his sharp gaze to Lady Evelyn. Madam, I must ask you to recall every interaction you have had with Colonel Leclerc. She stiffened. I told you before, I knew him only through diplomatic circles. And yet he found you an invaluable distraction, Holmes remarked. Lady Evelyn, you were never his true accomplice. You were his unwitting smokescreen. While all eyes were on you, Leclerc moved unobserved. He studied the layout of this house, learned the placement of the safe, and knew precisely when and how to act. But even he required an inside hand, someone who could ensure the right conditions. His gaze flickered to Redfern, who sat sullenly. That was you, was it not? You ensured the house's security was at its weakest that night. You let them inside. Redfern said nothing. Sir Reginald's face had darkened with rage. You are telling me that a French diplomat orchestrated this theft? With what purpose? Holmes's voice was quiet but firm. To shape the fate of Britain itself. A scandal is only useful if it reaches the right ears at the right time. The letter, in its original form, was damaging but not ruinous. However, by altering it, by exaggerating the affair it exposed, by releasing it strategically, Leclerc and his allies could influence foreign policy, turn public sentiment against the Crown, and weaken Britain's standing in Europe, and they could do so without ever appearing to have lifted a hand. A stunned silence followed. Lady Evelyn was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I was a fool. Holmes shook his head. Not a fool, Lady Evelyn. Merely convenient. Sir Reginald turned to Holmes, his expression grim. And Leclerc? Holmes allowed himself a small smile. On a ship to Calais, no doubt. But fear not, he will not reach his destination. Sir Reginald exhaled sharply. And Redfern? Holmes's gaze fell upon the man, who sat motionless, his face pale. That, he said, is for you to decide. Holmes stood before the assembled company, his expression composed but his eyes alight with keen intelligence. Sir Reginald, Lady Evelyn and Redfern watched him in rapt silence, the weight of the revelation settling upon them like a heavy fog. It was never merely about the theft of a letter, Holmes began, his tone measured. It was about substitution. The original letter, damaging, certainly, but not ruinous, was removed. In its place, a meticulously crafted forgery was inserted, one designed to ignite a firestorm. Sir Reginald leaned forward. But why? To what end? To weaken Britain on the international stage, Holmes replied. A scandal of this magnitude, once revealed, would not merely embarrass a royal figure, it would shake the public's faith in the monarchy, stir unrest within the government, and force Britain into a position of diplomatic vulnerability. And who then would step forward to control the narrative? The very forces that orchestrated the deception. Lady Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. And the real letter? Holmes turned to her. It was never meant to be seen again, at least not in England. Leclerc, I suspect, has arranged for its safe passage out of the country. If it reaches Paris, it will serve as leverage, a tool to manipulate Britain's foreign policy under the guise of friendly negotiation. Sir Reginald's face darkened. Then we must recover it before that happens. Holmes's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. Precisely, Sir Reginald, which is why we have no time to waste. Leclerc will not risk another night in London. If I am not mistaken, he is already making for the coast. He turned sharply to me. Watson, the game is afoot. To the docks. Our cab rattled through the near-empty streets of London, Holmes leaning forward in anticipation, his sharp gaze fixed upon the road ahead. The air was thick with mist, the lamps casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. He will choose the most discreet route, Holmes murmured. The commercial docks, where a man may slip away unnoticed among the many night-bound steamers. As we neared the Thames, the scent of salt and coal filled the air. The docks were alive with late-night activity, crates being hauled, ropes coiled, and the occasional glint of a customs officer's lantern. Amidst the flurry of movement, Holmes's eyes locked onto a solitary figure weaving through the crowd with purpose. "There he is," he said calmly. "Leclerc." The French envoy was dressed plainly, his collar turned up to shield his face, a small leather case clutched tightly beneath his arm. He moved with urgency, his destination clear, a steamship bound for Calais. "Watson," Holmes murmured, "I believe it is time we intercepted our departing friend." And with that, he was off, slipping through the throng with the precision of a hunter closing in on his prey. Leclerc was but a few paces from the gangplank when Holmes made his move. With a sudden burst of speed, he intercepted the envoy, one hand clamping down upon his arm. "Going somewhere, Colonel?" Holmes inquired smoothly. Leclerc started, his hand darting to the inside of his coat. But Holmes was faster. In an instant, he had seized the leather case from the Frenchman's grasp and stepped back, his fingers swiftly unfastening the buckle. The moment the case fell open, I saw it. The letter, still bearing the seal of Sir Reginald's office, the original, unaltered. Leclerc's expression twisted into fury. "You fool!" he hissed. "You do not know what you have done." Holmes merely smiled. "On the contrary, Colonel, I know exactly what I have done." The distant sound of approaching constables signalled the end. Leclerc stiffened, then exhaled sharply, his posture relaxing into resignation. He knew the game was over. Holmes turned to me with a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Watson," he said, slipping the letter into his coat, "I believe we have just prevented a catastrophe." And with that, the matter was settled. We had returned to Baker Street in the early hours of the morning, the weight of the night's events pressing upon us like the lingering London fog. Holmes, however, showed no signs of fatigue. He sat in his chair, the recovered letter resting upon the table beside him, and regarded Sir Reginald with an air of quiet satisfaction. "Sir Reginald," Holmes began, steepling his fingers, "this affair was never one of mere theft. It was deception in its purest and most insidious form, a carefully orchestrated scheme designed to alter the course of international relations. The key to unraveling it lay not in what was taken, but in what was left behind. Sir Reginald nodded solemnly. "The forgery," he murmured. "Precisely," Holmes said. Had the letter simply been stolen, its absence would have been noted at once. But by replacing it with a near-perfect copy, our adversaries ensured that no alarm was raised. They intended for the false letter to be read and acted upon, while the true document was spirited away to be used at their convenience. The forgery was no crude imitation. It bore the seal of authenticity, a seal that could only have been duplicated by a master craftsman. I recalled Fournier's confession at the Black Swan and nodded. Jacques Fournier, the forger. Holmes smiled. A most obliging fellow. His work was meticulous, but he made one crucial error: the ink. The original letter was several months old, and yet the forgery's ink was still fresh. That alone might have raised suspicions, but there were other clues. The perfume in Sir Reginald's study, a subtle but telling trace. The half-burned letter in the fireplace, which contained coded French phrases. And of course the suspicious departure of Colonel Leclerc mere hours after the crime. Sir Reginald exhaled sharply. Then it was Leclerc all along. Holmes inclined his head. Leclerc was the mastermind, yes, but he did not act alone. He had allies, men who sought to see Britain weakened, and he used those closest to you as instruments in his scheme. Some willingly, some without their knowledge. His gaze flickered toward Lady Evelyn, who sat silently, her expression unreadable. Lady Evelyn's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed upon the floor. At length she spoke, her voice low and strained. "I was a fool," she murmured. "I thought Leclerc was merely a charming diplomat, a friend who enjoyed our conversations. I never suspected I was being used." Holmes regarded her with something akin to sympathy. "You were never meant to suspect, Lady Evelyn. That was Leclerc's greatest skill, manipulation. He positioned himself carefully, ensuring that you, an English woman of influence, were seen speaking with him often. By doing so, he diverted attention away from his true objective." She raised her eyes to him. "But I did nothing," she protested. "I never spoke of my uncle's work, nor did I betray any secrets." Holmes nodded. "And yet, your mere presence was enough. While you entertained Leclerc and his associates, he was free to study the movements of this household, to observe the routines of the staff, to determine when Sir Reginald's study would be unoccupied. Your association with him ensured that no one thought it odd when he took an interest in Ashborne House. He was never suspected, because you were the one who drew attention." A deep silence followed. Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened around the handkerchief in her lap. "Then I was nothing more than a convenient distraction." Holmes inclined his head. "Precisely." Sir Reginald let out a weary sigh. "You could not have known Evelyn," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And in the end, no true harm was done. The letter is recovered." Holmes gave a small smile. "But only because of one final player in this grand deception." He turned his gaze to Harold Redfern. Harold Redfern sat stiffly in his chair, his expression set in grim resignation. The firelight cast shifting shadows across his face, making him appear older than his years. "You knew all along that you were being used, did you not?" Holmes asked. Redfern hesitated. "I knew that Leclerc and his allies sought to reveal the truth," he said at last. "I believed that by assisting them I was serving a higher purpose. That letter contained evidence of corruption, secrets that the British people deserved to know." Holmes gave a quiet sigh. "Ah, the idealist's burden. And yet, Redfern, you were never more than a tool in their hands. You saw only what they wanted you to see. The truth they fed you was a carefully tailored version of events, designed to appeal to your sense of justice. You believed you were working toward transparency, but in reality, you were serving the interests of foreign agents who had no care for Britain's well-being, only for its downfall. Redfern's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sir Reginald shook his head. And to think I once trusted you. Redfern finally met his gaze. I never meant to betray England, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I thought I was saving it. Holmes regarded him for a long moment. Self-delusion is a dangerous thing, Redfern, he said. You were played by men far cleverer than yourself, and in the end, you nearly became the instrument of your own country's ruin. Redfern's shoulders slumped. What happens to me now? Sir Reginald's face was unreadable. That is not for me to decide, he said. But you would do well to reflect on the price of misplaced loyalty. Holmes turned to me, a small smile playing at his lips. Watson, I believe our work here is done. And with that, the case of the stolen letter, the letter that could have toppled a kingdom, was at last brought to its conclusion. Colonel Leclerc's downfall, like that of many men who believed themselves to be beyond reproach, was his own arrogance. From the beginning, he had orchestrated each move with the precision of a seasoned strategist, convinced that his superior planning would shield him from exposure. But in the end, it was his failure to account for the mind of Sherlock Holmes that proved his undoing. Leclerc's mistake, Holmes remarked as we sat before the fire that evening, was in believing that secrecy alone was sufficient to mask his intentions. He assumed that by moving within the shadows of diplomacy, he could act with impunity. But secrecy, Watson, is never absolute. There are always traces, small, seemingly inconsequential details that, when examined correctly, tell a story in their own right. I nodded, such as the forgery, the perfume, and Redfern's misplaced idealism. Precisely, Holmes said. Had he simply stolen the letter, the matter would have been one of simple theft. But by attempting to alter it, by introducing a deception so intricate, he created an inconsistency, one that could not withstand scrutiny. That is the folly of all conspirators, Watson. They believe that they can manipulate perception without consequence. But perception is only as strong as the weakest flaw in the illusion. And that flaw, I mused, was you. Holmes allowed himself a small smile. Indeed. And now Leclerc will learn that even the most carefully laid plans crumble in the face of truth. True to Holmes's prediction, the affair was swiftly buried beneath the machinery of government. The real letter, now recovered, was discreetly restored to its rightful place, its contents once again relegated to the silence of locked archives. No official statement was made, no public acknowledgement of the near disaster. Sir Reginald, though visibly relieved, carried himself with the demeanour of a man who had come too close to catastrophe. There will be no inquiry, he told us gravely. No charges, no trials. The Prime Minister has decreed that the matter is resolved, and that is the end of it. A convenient resolution, I remarked. A necessary one, Holmes corrected. Some secrets, Watson, are too dangerous even to be spoken aloud. The true success of this case lies not in the revelation of its details, but in its erasure. Redfern, disgraced but spared, was quietly dismissed from his position. He would never serve in government again, but neither would he be prosecuted. He was a pawn, after all, Holmes had said, and pawns, when removed from the board, are of no further consequence. As for Lady Evelyn, she withdrew from public life, no doubt forever haunted by the knowledge that she had unwittingly played a role in a scheme far beyond her comprehension. And so, as quickly as it had begun, the affair of the stolen letter vanished into obscurity, its existence denied even as its consequences remained very much real. As we prepared to take our leave of Ashborne House, Sir Reginald turned to Holmes with an air of grave sincerity. "You have done a great service to this nation, Mr. Holmes. I do not wish it to go unrecognised." Holmes regarded him with amusement. "I assure you, Sir Reginald, I require no recognition." "Then take this," Sir Reginald pressed, withdrawing a small but weighty pouch from his coat. "A token of gratitude. I insist." Holmes did not so much as glance at it. "I fear, Sir Reginald, that you misunderstand my motives. This case, though intriguing, was hardly more than an intellectual exercise, a puzzle to be solved. If I were to accept payment for every time I prevented an international disaster, I dare say I should be quite insufferable." Sir Reginald hesitated, then let out a weary chuckle. "Then I can only offer you my thanks." Holmes inclined his head. "That, Sir Reginald, will suffice." And with that, we departed, leaving behind the remnants of a conspiracy that had nearly altered the course of history. The streets of London stretched before us, quiet beneath the glow of the gas lamps. Holmes walked at a measured pace, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind no doubt already turning to the next great mystery that would command his attention. I, however, could not shake the lingering weight of what we had just prevented. "It is unsettling, Holmes," I said at last. "How close we came to disaster. Had you not intervened, had the forgery been accepted as truth, then Britain would have been weakened and our enemies emboldened," Holmes finished. "Yes, Watson, we stood at the edge of an abyss, but such is the nature of history. It is shaped not by the grand events chronicled in books, but by the quiet, unseen battles fought in the shadows." I sighed. "And yet no one will ever know." Holmes gave me a sidelong glance. "Would you prefer that they did?" I hesitated. "No," I admitted. "I suppose some victories must remain unspoken." Holmes smiled. "Precisely, Watson, and that is the way of the world." As we ascended the stairs to 221B Baker Street, Holmes reached for his pipe, lighting it with practiced ease. "My dear Watson," he said, exhaling a thin stream of smoke, "the world is moved not by what is seen, but by what remains hidden." I glanced at him, knowing that behind his casual remark lay a far deeper truth. As I took my seat by the fire, I could not help but wonder, how many more secrets had Holmes uncovered that would never be known, and how many more, even now, were waiting to be solved? But I knew one thing for certain: the game was never truly over. As we stepped into 221B Baker Street, Holmes cast aside his coat and reached for his pipe. He settled into his chair, exhaling a slow stream of smoke, his gaze fixed upon the flickering fire. A forgery so perfect that it nearly reshaped the course of a nation, I mused, shaking my head. And yet, in the end, it was the smallest of details that unravelled it all. Holmes gave a faint smile. "A lesson, Watson, that deception is most fragile when built upon arrogance. Leclerc believed himself untouchable, but even the most intricate lies cannot stand against the weight of truth." I nodded. "And yet, no one will ever know how close we came to disaster." "Perhaps," Holmes murmured. "But the greatest mysteries of this world, Watson, are not those that are solved, but those that are never discovered at all." He leaned back, the glow of his pipe casting shadows across his sharp features. "Tell me, Watson, how many other unseen hands shape the fate of nations even now? And how many times has history been rewritten without the world ever knowing. What do you think was Colonel Leclerc's greatest mistake? Was it trusting the wrong ally, underestimating Holmes, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. If you love Sherlock Holmes mysteries and want more thrilling cases, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share this story with fellow mystery lovers and let's unravel more secrets together. Until the next case, the game is always afoot.